The gravel bit through the knees of Elijah Carter's suit pants before he even understood why he was on the ground.
Hands where I can see them!
Officer Dale Kessler said, though Elijah's hands hadn't moved from the wheel of his black Porsche 911 in over a minute. I haven't done anything wrong, officer. Elijah's voice stayed even, the same tone he used in front of a jury. This car is registered to me. I can show you the title. Sure it is. Kessler's hand dropped to his belt, not drawing anything, just resting there, a gesture meant to be seen. Get out. Now. Elijah got out slowly, palms open, the way he'd trained himself to move a decade ago and never stopped doing. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He'd learned that arguing only gave men like this more to work with. It didn't matter. Kessler's partner, a younger officer named Tobin, was already circling the Porsche with his phone out, photographing the plate like it was contraband. A pickup truck slowed on the shoulder. A woman walking her dog stopped mid-stride. Within 30 seconds, 4 phones were up, 4 red recording dots blinking in the noon light. This car's worth more than you make in a year, Kessler said, loud enough for the gathering crowd. Where'd a guy like you get a Porsche like this? It's mine, Elijah said. I bought it. I can show you the registration in the glove box. I bet you can. Kessler's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Turn around. Elijah turned around. The cuffs went on tight enough to bite into his wrists, tight enough that he felt his pulse in his fingertips within a minute. He didn't pull against them. He'd given that same advice to frightened people for years. Don't resist. Don't argue. Survive the moment. Fix it later. He hadn't expected to need it himself today. In a suit he pressed that morning with his own hands, on a lonely county road 4 hours from the courthouse where, at exactly 4 o'clock, he was supposed to take an oath. On your knees, Kessler said. There was no legal reason for it. Elijah was already cuffed, already compliant, already still. Kneeling wasn't procedure, it was theater. Kessler took a half step back as Elijah's knees hit the gravel, angling his own body toward the crowd like a man giving a speech. You are going to jail, thief, Kessler announced, pointing a finger an inch from Elijah's face. You hear me? Jail. Behind the wall of phones, a woman gasped. Nobody lowered their camera. Nobody said a word in his defense. A man in a golf shirt actually stepped closer, lifting his phone the way you might at a concert, not for a person's life folding in on itself on the side of a county road. Elijah looked past Kessler, past the crowd, at the Porsche gleaming black under the sun. He thought, absurdly, of his father's hands, thick-knuckled, permanently stained at the cuticles with grease no soap ever fully lifted, torquing bolts into cars just like this one for 31 years without ever driving one off the lot. He thought of a Polaroid taped inside a locker that didn't exist anymore. He said none of it out loud. Officer, Elijah said instead, quietly enough that only Kessler and Tobin could hear, I'd like this stop documented as an official report. Badge numbers, timestamps, all of it. Can you make sure that happens? Kessler laughed, a short, surprised bark, the sound of a man who'd expected pleading and gotten something else entirely. Oh, we'll document it, he said, hauling Elijah up by the arm. Don't you worry about that. He didn't know what he was promising. As Kessler slammed the patrol car door, Elijah leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, the way a man might mentally cross the first item off a checklist. Then he opened them again and found the dashboard clock through the windshield glass. 11:47 a.m., 4 hours and 13 minutes until the ceremony was supposed to begin. 4 hours and 13 minutes until the county he was about to be sworn in to protect would discover exactly what its officers did when they thought no one important was watching. Tobin lingered by the open door a second too long, glancing at Elijah's face, the stillness of it, the total absence of panic, like something about it didn't add up. He had no idea how right he was. The patrol car pulled off the shoulder at 12:04, and through the rear window, Elijah watched a flatbed tow truck backing toward his father's Porsche. Careful with the paint. Kessler glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Worried about your paint job? Most guys in your position worry about their bail. Elijah said nothing. He watched the tow operator hook the front end without a single strap protecting the lip of the bumper, and he made himself look away instead of asking again. Some fights weren't worth the breath. Tobin sat up front, Quiet, one hand still resting on the dash camera mount he'd adjusted twice in the last 10 minutes. He hadn't said a word since the crowd dispersed, and when Kessler radioed dispatch, recovered stolen vehicle, suspect in custody, request tow to impound, Tobin's jaw tightened just slightly, like a man biting down on a question he wasn't ready to ask out loud. You didn't run the plate first, Elijah said quietly. Excuse me? Before you pulled me over, you didn't run the plate. Kessler's eyes found the mirror again. Save it for the desk sergeant. The Ashford County Sheriff's substation smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead as they walked Elijah past a row of bolted-down chairs toward the booking counter, his wrists still cuffed, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder seam, where Kessler had hauled him upright on the roadside. The booking clerk, a woman named Reyes with reading glasses pushed up into grey hair, didn't look up from her screen. Name, Elijah Carter. Date of birth, he gave it. Occupation. He paused for half a second, not hesitation, calculation. Public service, he said. Reyes typed it exactly as spoken, uninterested, and moved to the next line. Kessler, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, smirked at the vagueness of it. Public service, he repeated, like it confirmed something he already believed. Sure. Charge? Reyes asked. Suspicion of grand theft auto, Kessler said. Failure to provide valid registration on request. Resisting. Elijah's head turned. I never resisted. You hesitated getting out of the vehicle. I asked a clarifying question. That's resisting where I'm from. Reyes typed without comment. She had heard 1,000 versions of this exact exchange and stopped weighing them years ago. That indifference, more than the cuffs, more than the gravel still ground into his palms, was the thing that settled cold in Elijah's chest. Not cruelty, routine. They walked him to a holding cell with a bench bolted to cinder block and a toilet without a lid. The door clanged shut behind him at 12:41. Alone, Elijah sat, elbows on his knees, and did the only thing that had kept him steady since the roadside. He counted forward. 3 hours and 19 minutes until the ceremony. If no one called it in as anything other than a routine booking, if the paperwork moved at its usual glacial pace, if Kessler's report sat in a queue instead of a supervisor's inbox, he might not make it at all. He thought about asking for his phone call early. He decided against it. Not yet. Back at the substation's front desk, Kessler was telling the story again, louder now, embellished, playing to a small audience of 2 deputies drinking coffee near the vending machine. Kids driving a $100,000 Porsche like it's nothing, he said. No hesitation getting out, real smooth, until I asked about the registration. Then all of a sudden, it's questions. Can you clarify that, officer? He mimicked the cadence, drawing a short laugh from one of the deputies. Tobin didn't laugh. He stood near the doorway to the parking lot, arms folded, watching the exchange with an expression he was clearly trying to keep neutral and failing. Something wrong? Kessler asked him. He asked to see the registration paperwork before we searched the glove box, Tobin said. He wasn't resisting, he was asking. The room went quiet for a beat too long. You writing his defense now? Kessler said, half a laugh in it, though something underneath the laugh had gone flat. I'm saying what happened. Kessler's jaw worked once, and he turned back toward the coffee machine like the conversation was over, but Tobin didn't move from the doorway. He was still standing there, phone in hand, when he pulled up the county's public records portal, the one every deputy had access to but rarely used, and typed in the one thing that had been nagging at him since the roadside. Carter, Elijah. The search returned a single result, and Tobin read it twice before the words fully landed. He pocketed the phone slowly, the screen still bright in his hand, a second too long before it went dark. He looked up at Kessler, still laughing near the vending machine, still completely unaware. Tobin didn't say anything. He just walked outside to make a call he didn't want to make. His stomach dropped, not from fear, but from certainty. Tobin's call went to the county clerk's office, not to his sergeant. He didn't fully understand why he made that choice until later. Maybe it was because his sergeant would have told him to mind his own business. Maybe it was because the name on his screen belonged to a list he'd seen once, months ago, tacked to a bulletin board during a mandatory briefing nobody paid attention to, a list of incoming county appointments. Printed by HR and forgotten by everyone except, apparently, some corner of his memory that had just woken up. Ashford County Clerk's Office. This is Deputy Tobin, badge 4471.
I need someone to check a name against the public safety appointee list. It's probably nothing. Go ahead. Elijah Carter. There was a pause on the other end, not long, but long enough that Tobin knew before she said anything that it wasn't nothing. That's not on a list, the woman said slowly. That's the swearing in today, 4 o'clock.
He's the new director of public safety. Tobin closed his eyes. He's supposed to be at the courthouse in... She paused, and he heard papers shuffling. 3 hours. Why are you asking? Tobin didn't answer. He hung up, stood in the parking lot with his hand still on his phone, and thought about the sound Kessler's voice had made announcing recovered stolen vehicle over the radio less than an hour ago. Inside, Elijah sat in the holding cell, doing arithmetic he'd already done 4 times. 1:58 p.m., 2 hours and 2 minutes. He'd requested his one phone call 20 minutes earlier and been told to wait. He hadn't pushed. Pushing invited attention, and attention right now would move too fast in the wrong direction before the paper trail existed to survive it. He needed Kessler's report filed. He needed it time-stamped, signed, entered into the system as an official record, not erased, not softened, not quietly walked back the moment someone realized who he was. An informal apology in a hallway wouldn't do what a signed false report would do. He understood that better than almost anyone in the building. When the guard finally came for him, it wasn't for the phone call. Your mother's online too, the guard said, sliding a phone through the slot. Booking sergeant said you get 5 minutes. Elijah took it. Mama. Elijah James Carter, where are you? I've called your office twice. Marcus said you left before 11. I'm fine, he said. Something happened. I'll be late. Late? Elijah, they're setting up chairs. Your ceremony is at 4. I know. You know? What is going on with you? Her voice cracked, not with anger now, but with the particular fear that comes from a mother hearing calm where she expects an explanation. You sound like your father the week before he passed. That same voice. Like you already made peace with something I don't understand yet. Elijah closed his eyes. His father's voice, calm even in the hospital bed, telling him not to worry, telling him everything was handled, when nothing had been handled at all, just accepted, the way Elijah had learned to accept things, quietly, on his own terms, until the terms could be changed. I love you, Mama. I'll explain everything tonight. He handed the phone back, before she could argue. At 2:15, Sergeant Reyes was 2 desks away from the booking counter when a call came through from the clerk's office, forwarded up the chain by someone in dispatch who'd finally connected the same 2 facts Tobin had connected an hour earlier. She pulled up the booking log, scrolled to the newest entry. Carter, Elijah, occupation, public service. She read it 3 times, the way people read things they already suspect are true but need to see confirmed. Then she picked up her desk phone and called the watch commander's office, her voice dropping into the flat. Careful register people use when they're about to say something that will end someone's career. You need to come look at something, she said. Now. Kessler, unaware, was 2 rooms away, finishing his incident report, with the satisfaction of a man closing a clean case. Suspect exhibited evasive behavior upon initial contact.
Failed to produce valid registration when requested. Resisted verbal instruction to exit vehicle. Vehicle recovered pending ownership verification. He read it back once, nodded to himself, and hit submit.
Then he leaned back in his chair and told the same story a 3rd time to a deputy who hadn't heard it yet, embellishing the part about the crowd, about how they'd all agreed with him. About how a guy like that, driving a car like that, had it coming the moment he pulled onto the shoulder looking guilty. He didn't notice the watch commander walking briskly past the break room toward Reyes's desk. He didn't notice Tobin standing near the holding cell hallway, arms crossed, watching the door like he was waiting for something to happen that he couldn't stop and didn't want to watch alone. At 3:14, the watch commander, a heavy-set man named Halloran, who'd run this substation for 11 years without a single incident that made the local paper, stood over Reyes's monitor and read the name for himself. Get him out of that cell, Halloran said. Now. And somebody find out who wrote this report. Kessler, Reyes said. He's still in the building. Halloran didn't respond right away. He was doing his own arithmetic, not about time, but about consequence, about the 11 clean years about to end, about the fact that in 46 minutes, the man his department had just spent 3 hours humiliating was supposed to be standing on the courthouse steps as the official who would, starting today, review every complaint ever filed against every officer under this roof. 46 minutes, Halloran said out loud to no one. Down the hall, the cell door unlocked with a metallic clang that Elijah had been waiting to hear since 11:47 that morning. A different guard stood in the doorway this time, not the one who'd walked him in. Someone more senior, someone whose hands were visibly unsteady on the keys. "Mr. Carter," the guard said, and something in the way he said it, the sudden and total absence of the flat procedural tone everyone else had used all afternoon, told Elijah everything he needed to know before another word was spoken. "I take it someone found the appointee list," Elijah said. The guard didn't answer. He just stepped back to let the door swing fully open. Behind him, down the corridor, Kessler was still at his desk, laughing at his own story, completely unaware that in the next room, his career had already started coming apart, and that the man he'd called a thief was about to walk past him on the way out, still wearing a torn suit. With barely 45 minutes left before the ceremony, he'd spent the entire afternoon fighting to reach. Elijah stepped out of the corridor into fluorescent light, and the first thing he saw was Kessler, mid-laugh, one hand braced on a co-worker's desk. The laugh didn't finish. Kessler's eyes moved from Elijah's face to Halloran's, standing rigid a few feet away, and something in his own expression shifted. Not recognition yet, just the animal sense that a room had changed temperature. "Mr. Carter," Halloran said, stepping forward before Kessler could speak. "I owe you an apology, and I intend to give you one properly. But first I need 5 minutes of your time, if you're willing." "I have 43, Elijah said. "Use them well." Halloran nodded once and turned toward Kessler. "Deputy, my office. What's going on?" Kessler asked, still half smiling, the smile of a man who hadn't yet been told the joke was on him. Now, the watch commander's office was small, government beige, a single window overlooking the impound lot where the Porsche sat under afternoon sun, front bumper scraped from a tow chain that had never been strapped correctly. Elijah stood near that window. Halloran sat behind his desk. Kessler remained standing near the door, arms crossed, the posture of a man bracing rather than listening. "This is Elijah Carter," Halloran said. "As of 4 o'clock today, he is Ashford County's Director of Public Safety. That means, starting today, he has direct oversight of every disciplinary file in this department, including yours." Kessler's arms uncrossed slowly. "I didn't know that." "No," Elijah said. "You didn't ask. I was responding to a vehicle that looked—" Kessler stopped himself, recalibrating. "I followed procedure." "You didn't run the plate before the stop," Elijah said. "Deputy Tobin can confirm that, and I suspect he already has. You ordered me out of the vehicle before requesting registration. You used the word thief in front of a recording crowd before any evidence existed to support it. You filed a report claiming I resisted, when the only thing I did was ask a question." He paused. "I'd like to know which part of that you consider procedure." Kessler's jaw tightened. "You were driving a car that didn't match." "Didn't match what?" Elijah's voice didn't rise. It never had, not once since 11 that morning, and the flatness of it now was somehow worse than shouting would have been. "Say the rest of that sentence." Kessler didn't. Halloran exhaled and turned his monitor around. "While you two were in the cell block, I pulled deputy activity logs. 5 years back." He tapped the screen. 31 traffic stops involving high-value vehicles. 26 of the drivers were black or Hispanic. 4 citations issued out of 31 stops. 0 arrests that led to charges beyond the initial booking. He looked up. Every single one of those reports was reviewed and signed off by the same supervisor. "Who?" Elijah asked, though something in Halloran's face told him the answer was already going to complicate the afternoon further. "Captain Renata Voss," Halloran said.
She's not in the building today. She's at the courthouse. He hesitated. She's presenting the county citation for your appointment. The room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. She spoke against creating this position. Halloran continued, quieter now. Publicly, 6 months ago, at a budget hearing, said the county didn't need her words. Another layer looking over officers' shoulders. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everybody has an opinion on budget line items. Elijah looked out the window at the Porsche again, at the chain marks scraped into the bumper, and thought about a woman he'd never met standing on courthouse steps in less than 40 minutes, ready to hand him a citation with a smile. Having spent 5 years signing off on exactly the kind of stop that had just cost him an afternoon and nearly cost him the ceremony itself. I want her file on my desk tonight, Elijah said. Not tomorrow, tonight. Understood. Kessler shifted his weight. Mr. Carter, if I'd known that's the problem, Elijah said, turning to face him fully for the first time since walking into the office. Not that you didn't know who I was. That it should never have mattered. You didn't need to know my job title to treat me like a person instead of a suspicion. He let that sit for a moment. Effective immediately, you're suspended without pay, pending a full review of your service record. Sergeant Reyes will document the timeline of today's booking as evidence, alongside Deputy Tobin's account and the witness recordings already circulating from the scene. Those recordings, Kessler started, will be part of the record, Elijah said, along with your report claiming I resisted arrest. Kessler's mouth opened and closed. Whatever defense he'd been building in his head over the last hour visibly collapsed under the weight of the 31 stops, still glowing on Halloran's monitor. I want to say, Kessler tried again, quieter. I wasn't trying to. I know you weren't trying to end your career today, Elijah said. You were trying to do what you've apparently done 30 times before without anyone stopping you. The difference this time is, I'm in a position to make sure it's the last. He turned back to Halloran. I need my personal belongings and the release paperwork for my vehicle. And I need someone in this building to explain to me, on paper, why a tow order for a private vehicle was issued before ownership verification was attempted, because that's a second incident file, not a footnote in the first. Halloran was already reaching for a legal pad. I'll have it ready before you leave the building. Elijah checked the clock above the door. 3:26 p.m., 34 minutes. He looked at Kessler once more, not with anger, though he'd earned it, but with something closer to the exhaustion of a man who'd spent an entire career watching this exact pattern repeat itself in courtrooms, case files, and now, finally, on the side of a county road with his own knees in the gravel. Take off the badge, Elijah said. Sergeant Reyes will log it into evidence. Kessler's hand moved to his chest slowly, fingers finding the pin like they didn't quite believe what they were doing. He set it on Halloran's desk without another word, the small metallic click of it landing louder in the room than anything anyone had said in the last 5 minutes. Elijah didn't watch him leave. He was already looking past him, out the door, toward the front desk where Tobin stood waiting, the only person in the building who'd made a decision before being forced into one. Deputy Tobin, Elijah said. Tobin straightened. Sir. You made a call an hour ago that most people in this building wouldn't have made. Elijah held out his hand. I won't forget that. Tobin shook it, and something in his shoulders loosened for the first time since noon. Behind them, on the desk, Kessler's badge caught the fluorescent light, small, ordinary, the kind of object that had meant everything an hour ago, and now meant nothing at all except the shape of a decision that could never be taken back. 31 minutes left, and Elijah Carter still had to find a way to get to the courthouse in a torn suit, in a Porsche with a scraped bumper, in time to shake the hand of a woman who had no idea yet that the man she was about to swear in already knew exactly who she was. The Porsche started on the third try, engine turning over rough from sitting cold and impound, and Elijah pulled out of the lot at 3:31 with a scraped bumper, a torn jacket, and 29 minutes to cover 11 miles of county road. He didn't speed. He'd spent the entire afternoon being punished for things he hadn't done. He wasn't going to hand anyone a legitimate reason with 29 minutes left. He drove the speed limit, hands steady on the wheel, and let the silence of the car settle the parts of him that were still quietly shaking from the inside. Not fear anymore, just the aftershock of adrenaline with nowhere left to go. He reached the courthouse at 3:52. The steps were already crowded, county staff, a few reporters who covered local government out of obligation more than interest,
his mother standing near the front row in the blue dress she'd worn to his father's funeral, her hands twisted together in front of her the way they always were when she was trying not to show she was afraid. She saw him first. Saw the torn shoulder seam, the faint gravel scrape along one cheek he hadn't noticed until he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror 20 minutes earlier. Her hand went to her mouth. "Elijah, I'm fine, Mama." He took both her hands. "I'll tell you everything tonight, I promise." She held his hands a second longer than necessary, reading his face the way mothers do, then let him go because the county clerk was already calling the ceremony to order, and some things, she understood this about her son better than anyone, needed to happen before they could be explained. Captain Renata Voss stood near the podium, in dress uniform, a folder of prepared remarks in her hand, and didn't recognize the man walking up the steps toward her until he was close enough that recognition arrived all at once, the way bad news does. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice, trained over years to stay level in front of cameras, betrayed her by catching slightly on his name. "I wasn't told you'd be arriving this way." "No," Elijah said. "I imagine you weren't." She looked at the torn jacket, at the faint mark on his cheek. Understanding moved across her face in stages, first confusion, then a flicker of denial, and finally something closer to dread. The particular dread of a person realizing that a name she'd read an hour ago in an incident report, and a name she was about to hand a ceremonial citation to were the same name. "There was an incident today," she said carefully, "involving one of my officers. I hadn't connected, you will," Elijah said, "tonight. I'd like your full file on Deputy Kessler's record, and I'd like to understand why 31 stops involving drivers who looked like me resulted in 4 citations and 0 explanations." He kept his voice even, the same register he'd used all afternoon, the one that had unsettled Tobin, unsettled Kessler, and was now visibly unsettling her. But that conversation happens after the ceremony, not during it. Voss's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in longer than she could probably remember, she had no prepared remark ready. "Understood," she finally said. The oath took 4 minutes. Elijah stood at the podium in his torn jacket, having refused the spare blazer someone from the clerk's office offered him backstage, and read the words as written. To serve with integrity, to protect without prejudice, to hold this office accountable to every citizen equally, and when he reached the last line, he paused just long enough that the crowd noticed. "I want to add something," he said, setting the paper down. "Not because it's part of the oath, because it's part of why I'm standing here in these clothes." The courthouse steps went quiet, in a way that had nothing to do with procedure. 4 hours ago, an officer of this county pulled me out of my car, put me on my knees on the side of a road, and called me a thief in front of a crowd that filmed it, and said nothing. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. Someone near the back audibly inhaled. "I want to be clear about why I'm telling you this today, of all days, not for sympathy, because the position I'm about to hold exists specifically to make sure what happened to me this morning stops happening to people who don't have a swearing-in ceremony waiting for them at 4 o'clock. People who just have the rest of their lives and no one coming to look for them." His mother in the front row pressed a hand to her chest. "My father spent 31 years building cars he never got to drive," Elijah said. "He taught me that dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you refuse to let them take. I'm not telling you this story because it ended today. I'm telling you because, starting today, it's my job to make sure fewer people have to live through it before someone finally listens." He picked the oath back up, finished the final line, and the applause that followed wasn't the polite, obligatory kind that usually followed county ceremonies. It was the sound of a crowd that had just watched someone turn an hour of humiliation into a promise they intended to keep. The consequences moved fast once they moved. Within the week, Kessler was terminated, his pattern of stops confirmed by the county's internal review, and referred to the district attorney's office for falsifying his report. The county's insurance carrier processed the damage to Elijah's vehicle without a single question about ownership, a small detail that felt, to everyone who knew the story, like its own quiet verdict. Captain Voss resigned 2 weeks later, before the review board could finish its hearing. Her letter cited personal reasons. Nobody who'd sat through the hearing believed that, and nobody said so out loud, because by then it didn't need to be said.
Deputy Tobin was reassigned, at his own request, to a newly created Early Intervention Unit, a program Elijah established in his first month in office.
Designed to flag exactly the kind of pattern that had gone unquestioned in Kessler's file for 5 years. Tobin didn't ask for credit.
Elijah gave it to him anyway, in the first line of the policy memo that created the unit, modeled after the judgment of one deputy who chose to verify before assuming.
Sergeant Reyes, the booking clerk who typed public service without blinking, stayed exactly where she was. Elijah made a point of thanking her personally, not for anything she'd done differently, but for the accuracy of her paperwork, which had become in the end some of the clearest evidence in the whole case. She hadn't tried to protect anyone. She'd just written down the truth, and the truth had been enough. Elijah found Tobin in the substation parking lot 3 weeks later, going over patrol assignments on a clipboard, and stopped beside him instead of walking past.
"How's the new unit?" Elijah asked.
"Busy," Tobin said. "Turns out there were more patterns nobody wanted to look at too closely." He hesitated. "I keep thinking about that day. What would have happened if I hadn't looked you up?" "You looked," Elijah said. "That's the part that matters. Most people don't." Tobin nodded slowly, and something in the set of his shoulders, steadier now than it had been that afternoon at the vending machine, told Elijah the conversation had landed exactly where it needed to. The Porsche was repaired within a month, the bumper reset, the scrape buffed out, until the black paint held no trace of the day it had spent, chained wrong on a flatbed. Elijah kept driving it, not because the county owed him a symbol, but because his father's dream hadn't asked for an apology. It had only ever asked to exist, uninterrupted, on an ordinary road. He drove it to his mother's house most Sundays now. She'd stopped asking him to explain that afternoon in detail after the first time he told her, sitting at her kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, neither of them drank. Because some stories don't need repeating once someone finally understands them completely. One evening, months later, closing out his first quarterly report as director, Elijah sat at his desk and looked at the small item he'd asked Reyes to send over from evidence storage once the case had fully closed, Kessler's badge, still holding the same dull shine it had the day it landed on Halloran's desk. He didn't display it. He didn't need a trophy. He placed it in a drawer, closed it, and turned instead to the stack of policy proposals waiting for his signature, 31 names still attached to files that had waited 5 years for someone to finally open them. Outside his window, the evening traffic moved steadily down the same county road where, months earlier, a crowd of strangers had lifted their phones and watched a man kneel in the gravel, without a single one of them stepping forward to ask if he was all right. Elijah liked to think, now, that if it happened again to someone else on some other afternoon, at least one of them would. Have you ever watched someone get judged before anyone knew the full truth, and wondered what you would have done if you'd been standing in that crowd? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that dignity isn't given, it's protected. Like, subscribe, and follow for more stories where the truth finally gets the chance to speak for itself.